All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming to part 2 of We Need to Talk, a discussion on racism in America. My name is Malynda. I am the worship leader here at Harmony Toluca Lake. I am a singer-songwriter, recording artist, and also an activist in my own right. I have 5 amazing panelists that are joining us today for part 2. I'm gonna read just a little bit of a bio on all of them, so please welcome them once I finish. At the very end, we have back for the second time, Mr. Karmel Humphrey. He is a comedian and owner and founder of Black Brew Coffee, which we have today, and I would love for you guys to sample it and purchase it if you are interested in buying and supporting this brand new company. Please welcome Karmel. And next to him, we have Rashaad King, who is a writer, transformational coach, talk personality, and entertainment executive from Atlanta. He's the co-founder of the social initiative, #OurTurn365, and the author of A Black Man's Blues Volume 1, The Introduction, a personal collection of artistic works which features themes in fatherlessness and discrimination of Black men. He's also the founder of RKG Entertainment, writing and producing socially conscious film, television, theater, and digital content. Please welcome Rashaad. Next to him, we have Mr. Jay Connor, a Los Angeles-based writer, producer, consultant, and founder of Extraordinary Ideas, where he serves as the co-host of the popular podcast, The Extraordinary Negroes, in addition to his role as editor at The Root. His work has been featured in prestigious outlets such as New York Times, Pitchfork, The Root, Huffington Post, South by Southwest, and many others. Please welcome Jay. And next we have Ms. Dani Fernandez. She's an actress and writer who has written for shows on Comedy Central, New Form, Full Screen, Epic Mealtime, as well as various humor sites. She started hosting at San Diego Comic-Con for Funimation, is that correct? Funimation, and has gone on to host for channels including Nerdist, Skybound, Geek and Sundry, Mental Floss, Meshamina, Bootleg Universe, and the list goes on. And she was also featured as herself in Disney's Ralph Breaks the Internet. Please welcome. And also returning, Mr. Dakota Lupo, who's an activist and filmmaker and the founder of Friendly Wolf Entertainment, working in film, TV, digital, and documentary. His work acts as a bridge between people, issues, and policy, working together with organizations such as the World Food Program, UNHCR, the Peace Palace, Carnegie Foundation, as well as other NGOs and governmental bodies. He uses these stories as a part of a broader platform to entice dialogue and drive forward public policy. He has a BFA in film and television from NYU. Please welcome Dakota. All right, so last time we covered a lot under this topic of racism, and it clearly is a topic we could talk about for hours and days and weeks and on end. So without going into what we focused on last, I want to try to focus on some new topics. So I'm gonna say a phrase, and I just want you guys to discuss what you think that means and to explain to the people here. Cultural appropriation. Let's get into that. We're getting right to it, and I'm coming to the chase. Cultural appropriation.
Jogging is just...
Who would like to tackle that first? Well, what is cultural appropriation? Let's start with that for anybody who doesn't know what that is. Jay, I feel like you, go for it.
Well, oh, this is loud. I like that. Cultural appropriation is when somebody appropriates a culture that is not their own. I think there's a difference between being influenced by something and basically appropriating it. So, I mean, I think that that's the best way to describe it. What was the question? What do we think about cultural appropriation?
Let's just talk about it. So what is the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation? Because I think there is a fine line and people don't know where that line is.
I think it's credit, and I think it's the same way you credit when you use a piece of music or you take a photo from somebody. I mean, there's a sense of authorship in art that we're very familiar with, and I think that when it comes to cultural appreciation, there's a sense of identifying what that is to its root and what that means to you and how you celebrate that. It's a lot different than saying this is mine. So I think it's kind of in the same way intellectual property could be stolen. It's a form of theft.
I think it's also capitalizing on someone else's culture. That's what I see a lot of. And it goes back to credit, but also the care, like it's not giving back to the community that you're taking from is another part of it, I feel like. That I see a lot of businesses that are capitalizing on someone else's culture without putting that money back into the community.
Yeah, I think if we look at a couple of examples, for example, in hip hop, in Japan, it's huge, and no one looks at Japanese kids dressing a certain way and no one feels weird about it because you can tell there's an appreciation for Wu-Tang and Outkast and J. Cole, but then you can see a kid out here who's representing it in a totally different way, and like Dani said, capitalizing on it, like this is mine, look at me, and it's more of, instead of appreciating hip hop, it's like, well, this is my thing, and like I made this up, or this is my style of dress. When you're like, nah, it's not really yours, bro. like the Japanese culture, kind of like they appreciate it. You can just tell they just love, hip hop artists. Where some kids are dressing that way, and it's like they're not giving credit, as Dakota said, to the originators.
And that actually is funny because I took a Lyft over earlier today, and my driver was Hispanic, and all the music that he was playing was hip-hop music. And he was into it more than I was. I mean, he knew every single word. And it was like, wow, okay. So, but I agree with everything that everybody said, because it's like, how do we draw the line between taking ownership of something that you didn't really kind of create, but you can still respect it? So I think that's kind of where we are.
So how does that play into racism?
I think in the way that cultural appropriation has come up, I think through media is often celebrities, actors, or musicians will collect or wear or do something that is seen in a way as a cultural appropriation. And I think whether or not that is the case, I think that the dialogue around it becomes very volatile from the very beginning. Whether or not it's well, I think that's the first step. Is that I think having a proper dialogue about it becomes a lot more educational, both for the artist and the people having the conversation. And I think that part of the issue is that the dialogue becomes so heavy so quickly, both in outrage and in defense. Oftentimes, one causes and triggers the other. And I think that there needs to be an overall sense of how to have a dialogue about something so that we can have a discussion and say, there is a fine line, and there is a gray area, and there is a sense of intention that one must exude, and a responsibility one must take. So sometimes it's the lack of something that we're discussing. And so I think that exploration needs to be something that, as a whole, the dialogue has to be better, less than it being about, well, who's right, who's wrong, and who's going to be the referee. It becomes, at that point, we all lose because we're all just too loud.
I was gonna say, I think like a perfect example would be when Miley Cyrus was twerking. And I know we're in a church, so I'm not gonna like talk about exactly what happened there. But it was like she invented twerking. And it was like we see this happening so much where people are like, no, this has been a thing. And just because it's new to you and you're gonna co-op it for your new brand or whatever that you're gonna make every couple of years. Like, I think it goes back to that, like not appreciating and honoring the roots of where something came from. And that, I think, is a part of racism, is like, no, this has been around, but you said it was ratchet, you said it was this, like you said all these things about it. And now when someone who isn't a person of color does it, then it's acceptable and okay.
So that's why it's harmful to that culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
well, also what I was gonna say was that when you consider like the history of black people in this country, I don't necessarily think that a lot of black people or black people as a whole have gotten like credit for creating this country, really, building this country. And so this isn't anything new, like you said, it's been going on for years and years and years. So how do we get to a point where, again, people can appreciate it, but acknowledge it, you know what I mean? Acknowledge the creation of it and be able to celebrate it, because I feel like everybody should be able to celebrate cultures, different cultures. People go to Japan, celebrate Japanese culture, the whole nine. So I think it's just a matter of everybody kind of understanding like where they, what their connection to it is, and then how can we celebrate that together.
Yeah, I also think it's important to be mindful of the consequences of when it comes to cultural appropriation. Because I mean, if we look specifically at the indigenous community, it's common for us to use them as mascots. Mm-hmm. We have the Washington Redskins, we have the Atlanta Falcons, we have the Florida State Seminoles. Like, we literally look at these people as less than.
Even as a Halloween costume.
Oh, go ahead.
Sometimes.
Yeah,
Even
even Halloween costumes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like people really don't understand that these cultures have a certain level of importance and representation as far as how these people identify with who they are. And when you're not mindful of those consequences, or I'm sorry, when you're not mindful of those intricacies, it creates consequences for these cultures. And it's a big reason why, Native Americans are essentially an endangered species right now. You know what I mean? As a byproduct of how people view them and how people mistreat them.
And so when you talk about how racism affects this, if we look at racism as a system and that one ethnic group dominates and controls the narrative, we go back to like Ridley Scott's Gods of Egypt, and everyone is white in a movie that's about Africa. But the story goes back further than that because people don't even call it what its religion is called. And David, we can talk about this later, because I talked about this at our last talk where, Greeks called Egypt, Egypt. It was really called Kemet, which means land of the blacks. Yet you see a movie where everyone is white, but they control the narrative. So they can say what things are supposed to be. We can say what the story is supposed to look like. And then now you don't know any better. If you're white, okay, that's us, because you have nothing to go against that. You're not worried about that, but then that's not really your culture. But you don't control the narrative. So that's what racism comes in, because the oppressor is controlling the narrative, controlling the story. So now, as a black person, we can't go make stories about Charlemagne and make him black. We can't even have Idris Elba be James Bond. People start freaking out. It's not even a real person, but so stuff like that. So that's where racism comes into play, in that a cultural appropriation really works against those that are being oppressed, not the other way around.
And I think something it's important to point out is that it's not that we can't, is that we won't. And I think because we can very well make Idris, and we very well can make a Charlemagne any color he wants to be. So, but I think the challenge becomes it's that those who are in power to enact those things aren't taking those strident steps to do that. So the ability is there, and I think that's important that these things can happen. They do happen, but with the responsibility behind it. If you can't understand the idea of what you're collecting, then let alone produce something or to put something out there or write a book or anything that there needs to be a base of educational responsibility that we all own, and then so that we're looking at culture, because there's cultural evolution, and from the slave trade to you go back to the Crusades, and you go even further back to Genghis Khan, and you have all these migrations of people and how culture evolved, but it's only between I think a lot of colonization that you begin to see that appropriation happen. So I think that there needs to be an identification of what cultural evolution is, so then you could see how blatantly appropriated certain parts are, because evolution happens and cultures shift and cultures blend, but they shouldn't be plucked, and then you see this time jump of, oh no, this is ours now with no history, and then you're dealing with the defense, which is as challenging as the attack.
So I want to kind of go back to what Karmel brought up about the Ridley Scott film, since most of you work in entertainment or the arts in some way. Why is representation so important, and why do you think people are afraid to give people representation? Because there does seem to be this resistance.
I feel the fear is financial, because there are safe methods to gain those finances, and a lot of people work up a ladder of which they are trying to continually attain the pleasure of whoever is above them. So if they do wrong by the company and don't find the sense of profit, well, then why are they there? I can find someone else that does. So I think that the machine that is built with a singular narrative of someone who looks like me, and for all intents and purposes, I'm not one that's marketed that way. So it's even this more defined version of a specific type of person that is on paper bankable based upon historical what's gone on in film. So I think that it's the fear of, I think I overheard you guys talking about taking a risk. It's not a risk to tell a story. It's just a story. And I think that this because we have a safe way to find profit doesn't mean that other ways are unsafe. They're just unexplored.
I mean, I do want to go, we did have a discussion up very heated, where we were both agreeing. That sounds like we were not agreeing with each other, but essentially about a lot of the filmmakers that we have today are because someone took a risk on them, and they're so unwilling. A lot of these studios are so unwilling to take a risk on POC creators or filmmakers or whatever, unless they have a built-in fan base, unless they have built-in, a stack of credits, where I've seen a lot of white, male, young directors who maybe directed one indie film are then handed a franchise. And that's what I mean about taking a risk. And a lot of times, because I am in the film industry, I'll see people that'll tweet and it should go to the best. It should go to the best. It was well, who is deciding who is the best? And what does that person look like? Is it because, do they think this show is the best because they relate to it, because that's other people that look like them? You know, and so it's frustrating to me that they're unwilling. I feel, and I think that they believe that there's singular demographics to these films. Like if we look at Crazy Rich Asians, I think they were like, oh, well, Asian people will come out and see this, and it's like, no, everyone's gonna come out and see this, and this is something that we've known. And it's like, oh, weird, I can relate to a family partying or like someone's mom not liking me. That's personal. But like we can relate to these, same with Black Panther. It was like, oh, weird, you can relate to this brother-sister dynamic. Weird that we have relationships just like everyone else does. And everyone relates to that. But to me, it's frustrating that it's seen as taking a risk, when in reality, they've been taking risks on young, white, straight, male directors since the beginning of time.
Anyone else want to cap?
Yes, what she said. No, I mean, representation is important because the content should be reflective of the audience. And that's been a big problem that we've had in Hollywood. I mean, whether it's, film, television, whether it's music, whatever it is, we've always had an issue with the content being reflective of the audience, and more importantly, the people that are creating the content being reflective of the audience. And that's why it's important that we have, diversity and inclusion, because we need to make sure that things are more equitable and that we tell these stories and that we get these things out so that we can make this world a better place, because we keep having white executives tell us the importance of diversity and inclusion, but the demographics within their company aren't reflective of those values.
I agree 100%, literally, with everything they said.
Thank you, brother.
The other thing is, I think, as it relates to like us trying to connect to the powers that be, I guess. That's one of the reasons why I founded RKG, just because I knew that it was always going to be, for now, it's one way. You know what I mean? It's always been this way. And a lot of people have started, creating their own productions and things like that. And I think that's also important because, instead of continuing to say, help me do this, help me do this, help me do this, I'm gonna empower myself to empower other people to be able to do that for themselves as well. And that sort of takes back, the power that everyone possesses. So that's just my spill on how that works.
I think that's, again, what everyone says is I agree with 100%. I think going back to Dakota's thing and kind of shifting at, if it's bankable, if it makes money, that's why you see like 30 franchises being redone again, the same, plot lines coming back again. How many hangovers do we need to see? It's like, okay, people get drunk and have fun. Like we've seen this 1,000 times, but it makes money, so it's just easy to do versus taking a risk. But then we look at someone like Jordan Peele, who's making some very unique films, but he's banking on himself, So it's like, it's not going to happen because if an older Jewish executive is looking down at Rashaad, he's just probably not going to relate to him. It's just the way it is. He probably gave it to his cousin who just got a USC last year. It's just easier for him. So familiarity is a big part of that. We just need to go ahead and bank on ourselves, put our own money, put our own finances, put our own resources into making our own films, and I think that will show that Black Panther is very possible. We can make tons of money off a film that's not, of the majority ethnicity. It's really easy, honestly, because everyone will go see a good film. I'm not going to watch it because it's just white folks or Greeks or Mexicans or whatever.
I think one of the most important things about Black Panther is that it was distributed. It was offered in 4,000 theaters, and I think that's something that we don't. We talk about how the numbers and money it's going to make. Just give it to people. There's a famine of culture and there's a famine of art. So give people that stuff and they will take it. Because why? Because it's there and they heard a small thing about it. I mean, people do a lot of things with their time. There's not just one thing that they like to do when they go to the movies. And I think that just giving it to people allows them to be the consumer, and it shows less of how they made the movie, but more how people wanted the movie because it was offered to them.
I think one of my favorite things about these films, too, is it shows how diverse we are, because I feel like still in Hollywood, there's a really singular view. Like being a Latina, there's a very singular view of a Latina, and if you don't fit that in their mind, that you're not Latina enough, you're not what they expected you to be. That was one of the things I loved about Girls Trip, is that they had these strong women, but they were all different. You had the wild child, you had the professional one, you had the mom, you had the one dealing with anxiety or vulnerability. It was like, no, we don't all fit in your little box, And so that's what I love about these films, is that they have a rich cast of characters that to people might be like, oh, they're all Asian. And it's like, no, but look at how different we all are.
Yeah, and to a point he made earlier, though, that's a big reason why it's important that we retain ownership. Just because, acquisition is the way they eliminate threats. They see you coming up, they see you out here doing, real well, they buy you out, and they don't have to worry about you. And I mean, I understand that it's super attractive to get that check, but at the same time, people of color aren't in a position to settle for being employees. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have that equity, we don't own anything virtually within the company or within the country, so it's very important that we maintain ownership.
Yes, and I was just gonna make this quick example. I know a lot of people don't really like his work. They're not really fans of his work.
Don't say him.
I'm just saying. Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry. He has never had any studio backing whatsoever.
Right.
All of his movies have been distributed through an independent distributor, Lionsgate. And he's controlled everything that he's done. He releases movies every month. So it's like he controls all of that, and he's never connected with an audience like that. Even with the show that he did, the first show that he did on TV, he was he was actually going with Fox with that, but Fox was doing a lot of shady stuff, and he couldn't say a lot of stuff that he wanted to say because they were trying to monitor everything, and so he literally just went another way. House of Pain, I think, has had like a number of seasons, like 12. It's a lot, but the whole point is, again, it is just retaining the ownership and just you finding the outlets that's appropriate for you, because he knows his audience. You know what I mean? And so his audience is not just anybody, and they come to everything that he does. So that's just the example.
And even that soundstage he built, you know what I mean?
A studio.
Yeah, people were mad about that. People were so mad. I mean, and I was there when all that was going on. They were trying to literally shut that down because he literally bought a military base, an entire military base with no studio financing, like with nobody saying to him, you can or you can't do this. And he did it. So yeah, that was.
So this is kind of a bigger question, but I'm curious to know, be it entertainment, be it politics, who do you think has the biggest responsibility now to start these conversations about racism and help to dismantle it?
White people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just being honest. I mean, we can't be oppressed and rectify the behavior that has brought about this oppression. So I mean, it's just a matter of they got to get past their discomfort. You know what I mean? They have to have these conversations. You know what I mean? Like, we can act as consultants, but we can't be project managers. You know what I mean? Like, we can tell you, we can give you our insight, but it's not our problem to fix.
Yes, please educate your friends, because I'm tired of dealing with them in my mentions. And the nicest thing is when I have a white guy in my mentions that, like, man, if you want to mansplain your friends, I'm cool with that. I don't have time. I'm trying to make stuff. Yeah. And so, but there is a truth to that. A lot of times I'll have my white guy friends that'll be like, I know my opinion doesn't matter because I'm just a white guy. I'm like, but you have the opportunity to reach people in a way, to reach a certain set of people that I just never will. They will never listen to me, but they might listen to you. And so I do think that is a part of their responsibility, is educating their friends and having those really difficult conversations with your racist family members at Thanksgiving. Like, I do agree.
Ruin family dinner. Do what you got to do. Have those conversations. I mean, there's not a peaceful time. There's not a proper time to protest, so there's not a proper time to have those conversations. If your family's there and they're acting up, you need to set them straight. It's just really that simple.
So that goes into being an ally, what does that mean? What does that mean for each of you individually? What does being an ally mean? How would you tell somebody to be an ally?
I think,
because we throw that word around a lot,
You're
but
right.
a lot of people don't know what it means to actually be one. So what does that mean?
I think when most of us see someone who's an ally, or at least for myself, or see someone that appreciates Black culture, Black people, Black history, whatever, it's very insular. Like they don't talk a lot about it. They may do like around me and my friends, but they're probably not wearing a FUBU shirt to that dinner. They're probably not like talking about how good Black brew coffee is, because it's great. Try it later. They're just kind of just enjoying it on their own and not really sharing with other people how great this person is, how great this product is. And so I think that's when I see someone that's an ally, they're on the forefront. They're not, it's cool to have my back, but have my front. You know what I'm saying? Go before me and talk to people about what we're doing, what I am. You don't have to be like, wearing dashikis and nothing like that, but just like tell people about your experience. That's to me what an ally would be. Not just enjoying our culture and not sharing it, but like telling people what's going on and why and maybe they will too.
Exactly that, because I have a lot of friends that are a lot of different types of friends. And what I try to express is that the more that you do talk about it, the more that people become aware of it. I have a friend, she's African American, and just how it relates to like racism, she's like, well, you stop talking about it. And that threw me for a loop. She had her explanation for it. And then I had another friend who was a Caucasian male, and he was like, no, we have to talk about it. And I think being an ally is when the things come up that are challenging, when the things come up, when you hear about things in the news, about people getting killed, murdered, when you see things happening around you, it is important to speak up and to say something about that and not just kind of let the things happen.
Yeah, I think, to me, the whole concept of allyship is funny to me because I think there's so many people out there that self-identify or self-describe themselves as ally when they shouldn't. I personally think an ally should never call themselves an ally. And I feel like your actions should be indicative of what it is that you are and who you are. And the people around you will know you're an ally based upon your actions as opposed to you run around telling people you are.
Like Christianity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's actually in the definition of a guru. In Sanskrit, gu meaning light and dark. Guru is that's there you're light and there you're dark. But a guru is the same thing. You're not supposed to ever call yourself a guru. So anybody that tells you they're a guru, they're not. You choose your guru. You are either a guru of someone else or not. So I think it's a great point that an ally is somebody who is selected by your actions. And I think that the idea of being a co-human is a good idea because I think that an ally, I mean, you asked the question and we brought it into race, but I think an ally is just the same way you have a friend that helps you move, right? They are an ally who says, oh, you need something? I'm going to use my services that I have some physical ability to carry some boxes. I'm going to help you. And if those services happen to be some sort of gap in terms of your pay wage or gap in terms of your cultural opportunity or gap in terms of your race where you can do something or speak about something, then sure, you're an ally, but not because you are that race or because you are that sex, but because you're a human who says, hey, you need something that I can offer help to? And then I'm pretty sure that person will be like, hey, this guy who helped me move all day, that's an ally. I'm going to buy him some pizza. And then he buys you pizza, and then you buy him, and then all of a sudden you're doing things and you're sharing, and then a community builds. So I think there's a sense of like peeling off who you are, think you need to be, and just if you're just going to be a friend to somebody, then it doesn't really matter if race is involved, because when it is involved, then who are you going to look towards? The people who helped you move, the people who bought you pizza, you know?
I wanted to say this goes for nice guys in my DMs too. Anytime someone self-identifies as a nice guy and they message me about it, same thing. Let us put that on you.
Right.
We're the ones that give you that title. Yeah, I agree. I do know, like you were saying about in the workplace is a huge part. And I think luckily we've been seeing that in Hollywood, not as much, but we've been hearing stories of women sharing their salaries together, of white women sharing their salaries with women of color. Mm-hmm. And so that they can know like, oh, I'm getting paid much less than you. That to me is a perfect ally in a way that doesn't harm them. You know, they were going to hire her regardless, but it's good to know, like, it's good to know that, you know, you want to do right, and these people are not, I mean, we're just historically not getting paid as much. So I think that's a small way. Also, if you're on a panel, I've seen this because I'm in the Comic-Con world, I can't tell you how many all-white panels I have. That should not be a thing, that should never have been a thing, but it certainly shouldn't be a thing today, and it's something I still see all the time. And so I think being an ally is like, oh, we don't have enough of, you know, different, we don't have enough voices up here. Maybe what instead we can do is I can ask around who is super into Star Wars, who's super into, you know, Marvel or DC Comics, and there's tons of us. We're not unicorns, you know? It's insane the amount of meetings I'm in, and they're like, you're a Latina that's in the anime, you're a unicorn. I'm like, no, it's just that you haven't seen me represented in media enough. You have a very, again, singular view of what I should be, and when I'm not that, like there's a whole underground world of luchadors and stuff. Like we're super into wrestling and and animated shows. So I forgot my train of thought, but essentially
No, you're
ask
fine.
her, like there shouldn't be there shouldn't be all white panels. Yeah, use your voice and get more representation.
Do you think there's almost a level of laziness on some people's parts to go and seek diversity?
For sure. I think there I think there's laziness. I think there's also a fear of not wanting to anger their core audience. This is what I've seen on all those channels that you listed that I've hosted at, is a lot of times their core audience that has been in the nerd world has been straight white men. And when someone like me is brought in, maybe I can be brought in as a guest. You know, this was at the beginning of a lot of these channels, but it was like, who is she? She doesn't look like me. I don't care about her opinion on anime or whatever. And I think a lot of times they don't want to upset their audience, and that's the excuse that they would use, not realizing by bringing in other people of other colors, they're able to widen their audience. But yeah, that's an excuse that I've heard for years.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just stems from discomfort, to be honest. I think a lot of times they're just afraid to kind of face the truth. Face what's really out there, kind of, you know, to that point, broaden your horizons. And I think that a lot of it just stems from fear and, you know, a level of comfort. And I definitely know a lot of times that, like, as a person of color, it's so frustrating because we go out of our way to learn, you know, the dominant culture because we have to in order to survive. We have no choice. I have to know what Friends is. You know what I'm saying? I never watched it a day in my life, but I have to know what it is. Whereas a lot of times, you know, if you have these conversations in, you know, writers' rooms or stuff like that. I mean, I remember one time I was in a writer's room and the EP asked me, for the record, I was the only black person in there, as you can guess. And the EP asked me, he said, Jay, like, when you watch a show, do you look for other, like, black people on a show? And I just looked at him like he was stupid. Like, I was like, you know, when's the last time you watched a show that had nothing but black people in it? You know what I mean? And it's just like a lot of times they just don't look for that stuff and they're just willfully ignorant.
Karmel, Rashaad, anyone? All right, I'm going to bring up a phrase that I think a lot of people cringe when they hear it, but I think it's something we need to talk about, and I would love to know what you think of it and how you explain it to people, because a lot of people don't think that white privilege exists. A lot of people think it's not a real thing, but just even talking about having the option to not look for diversity, that's a privilege in itself. Yeah. Being able to watch TV and only see yourself, or not even think about the fact that everybody looks like you because it's just normal to you, that is a privilege. Yeah. So I just want to talk about that phrase a little bit and what exactly it means.
I think the easiest way to define white privilege is it's not a matter of what it is that you face, it's a matter of what it is that you don't have to. And that's just the most succinct, easiest way to deal with it. And a lot of times you hear like, oh, I was poor, I didn't have to. Okay, well, what does that have to do with white privilege? What does that have to do with the things that you didn't have to face? You know what I mean? What does it have to do with being, you know, walking in a store and getting looked at crazy, or having to be paranoid about a police officer, or, you know, worrying about if you're gonna get a job because your name is ethnic? You know what I mean? There's a lot of, it's so pervasive, there's so many different levels to it. But like I said, the easiest way and most succinct way to describe it is it's not a matter of what it is you face, it's a matter of what it is that you don't have to.
I think sometimes white privilege is it's ironic that it's such a difference of opportunity that you can then take that opportunity and say you don't have it. Like, that's how powerful it is to say, oh, I am so privileged, I could tell you that I don't have privilege. Like, that is a privilege in and of itself to tell you that, say, if you're not privileged. I think if you think about privilege like a bank account, and if you have a certain amount of it, just because you don't spend it does not mean it's not there. And I think that there's something to be said about understanding that, because I think what I hear from people who are I'm from the East Coast that are well educated but come from either a small Italian enclave or a small Irish enclave amidst I went to high school and it was 40%, 20%, black, white, and Hispanic. And that's just, you know, there was less of a sense of a real border between races, but there is still an identification of it that people don't understand the fact of, like exactly what you said. Well, I face the same challenges that the person sitting next to me does, so how is it that I have privilege? And it's the lack of education that it's about the opportunity, and I think the word opportunity gets lost in this because privilege sounds like I have something. Opportunity sounds like there's something out there. And I think that to say someone is privileged, I can understand from a lack of their awareness of it to say, well, wait a second, I don't have anything. And that's hard when you feel like you're struggling and you're working multiple jobs and you're not able to pay your rent and you're unable to pay your car bills, and somebody says to you, well, you have privilege. Well, there's a little bit of volatility in there to say, no, wait a second, I'm having a tough time. And I think that voice has to be understood and to be educated, as opposed to be vilified because there's an instant defense, and not offering the sense of you have to care for poor white people who don't realize they have privilege. But I think it needs to be an understanding that there's a lack of education, there's a lack of understanding, and I think that is a place to begin, because I think the thing about having white privilege as a white man is something that I heard Bernie Sanders speak downtown like about a few months ago, and he says, I got to spread my white privilege thin. I got to dish it out, and that's something that feels empowering to say, I got dealt a better hand. Well, what am I doing with this basket of food? Well, everyone else is hungry. Let me start giving what I can and offer the opportunities that I can.
I'm definitely hungry, brother.
Well, so what was I saying? But I think that takes it back to what you said, when you have executives and EPs in writers' room saying, hey, let's have this one guy here, and he's going to sprinkle a little bit of his life, and he's going to make everything better. Well, but who's offering him a show? You make the decisions. You have a room full of black writers and one white writer. See how that works out, and create something that's happening. I mean, there's just no chance to speak any sense of creativity if those who have the opportunity don't offer it to others. And that's not something that has to be conscious or charity work or a gift, but it has to be an idea that we are dealing with a different deck of cards here. So why wouldn't you want somebody who is a unicorn to be more highly represented, so we could begin to fortify these small little sects that just they remain small little sects. And you're talking about anime. There's not even, it's animation. There's not, I mean, there's the fact that it's not even about the faces. It's about, can we include culture just theoretically or creatively? It's a really, it's overwhelmingly asinine that you have to think about that as something. And it's, for me, it's how do I involve my community, and I say my in terms of white people that I know, that I grew up with, how do I allow them to understand something that for me seems, without no pun intended, black and white, and for others, I know they know the same thing, and I know we grew up in the same place, and I know they have a lot of the same information, but it's just a perspective. And I think that's the toughest part, because that perspective needs to be shifted, or else we can't get to steps 2 to 10. We need step 1, and that's what I feel like people don't want to have that first step. They're afraid. They say, I could do the rest of it, so why do the hard part?
Agreed. And I think it also has to do with like awareness, because I don't think a lot of people realize that they're privileged in that sense. I have a friend, I've been friends with him since I think like 2nd grade, and he's white, and all throughout school I was at his house, he came over to mine, and then when President Trump got elected, we had a conversation about it. His parents voted for Trump or whatever, and he's like, yeah, you know, I'm with you, like with the whole, like, I think this was like right before President Trump got elected, like the Black Lives Matter movement and all that. He's like, yeah, like I feel you on that, and I understand that completely. He was like, but my parents feel differently. And I was like, okay, well, how do they feel differently? And he just says, well, they've expressed to me that they don't really say much about things because they feel like, because they've lived a certain level. And his mom said this verbatim to me after I called her, after he said this to me, because I was like so shocked. But basically, she said, and he said that because they've been taught that they have been the best at everything, that they, you know, that they're who they are, for someone to say that other people are equal in that sense felt like oppression to them. And I was completely shocked. I was completely shocked. And I was like, and again, we like love each other. I feel like I've always felt love when I've been at their place. He's always felt love at my place. So it was kind of weird, but I just never heard that perspective before. So I think it also has to do, again, with just the awareness and understanding that this is a real thing. And it's not something that millions of people are just making up. So definitely having the conversation kind of moves everything forward. So,
real quickly, the thing about white privilege, thing that's helped me to friends of mine who are from a very masculine, male-dominated Italian society or culture in New York, that to offer the idea of being a privilege as a man versus being a woman, and just the fact that you go to the movie theater, you park in the lot, you go to the movie, and you're on your phone on your way out, and you could just walk to your car and you drive home. The fact that you can do that without worrying about walking through that parking lot without looking up from your phone, that right there is a very identifiable privilege for men to go, okay, that's a first step. So I think finding those opportunities, like you said, people you love and care about who just have, they feel, I mean, and you hit yourself in the head with that microphone, absolutely, because it's so, we have to go like 18 steps to get to the first thing. Yeah. And I think that it's finding a key to make somebody who doesn't understand you understand something that they already understand, or at least highlight something that they already know, and they go, oh, okay, so this, and then you begin to roll that ball. But that's so hard when you're upset, and that's so hard when you're, even now we're talking with passion. The last thing that someone who is unsure or afraid wants to hear is strong voice, because that's intimidating. So I think it's a type of dialogue before we even figure out the content. It's how can we talk to each other? How can we have a discussion that's civil without it being, well, let me just get my spear and my shield just in case. You don't need that.
So right now I'm going to ask Tracy to go around with some index cards and some pens. And if you guys have questions that you want to ask without me calling on you or you feeling embarrassed standing up, asking on the mic, just write it on the index card. JJ, if you could play a little music while they do this, that'd be great. So just take about 3 minutes to write down a question on your index card, and we'll put it in the basket, and then we'll do a Q&A with the panelists. Thanks, you guys. Thank you again for coming to part 2. We're going to get going with the questions now. I'm just going to pull them at random, and whoever wants to take them on, go for it. Okay. How would you respond to those that say that race issues are not a topic to be discussed in church?
To discuss it.
I know, I got a good one. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please, that was exciting.
Yeah, I love using this quote whenever people, like the stuff that was happening at the border and being tear gassed, and I had to see all of that. And I, growing up in the church, I love using quotes and psalms and biblical things back at people. And my favorite is, whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. I think it is our responsibility to speak up for those that are, you know, as the church always talks about speaking up for those that are less fortunate, and I think that also has to do with a place of privilege. I think it's necessary conversation when you see crimes happening to people of color to speak up, especially if you're a church-going person. I don't understand the cognitive dissonance that happens between that where Christians are able to just turn a blind eye. God, I also think it's funny we created these borders, by the way. He doesn't necessarily see them, like we created them. And we're like, you can't come in here, and you're this color, so you don't deserve, like, yeah, so our cute little borders and stuff, our cute little rules that we put up for why we are racist to other people, I don't think he sees that. And I think what he does, what I often say is, your Christ would not recognize you.
I think it's a touchy subject because I think people look at the Bible as being this very pure and untouchable thing. Like, we can't bring politics, we can't bring business, it's almost separate from like real life, when the very thing of the Bible is talking about real life. So there's so many stories that are talking about race, talking about sexism, talking about business, talking about all the things we do on a regular basis, but we come to church and think it just stays out there, and God's like, what are you doing? Like, every story is in there to talk about what you're gonna see out there. So it really makes no sense not to discuss race. I think a lot of things in the Bible, especially when you talk about, as you said, as you do in the least of these, but there's times where they're talking about this group of people are doing this because they don't like this group of people, and this happened. And God's like, that's exactly what you're doing on a daily basis. You see what happened to them? Like, why are you doing that? But then we don't talk about it because it's now responsibility now is on you because you heard it. So if I don't talk about it, I'm not responsible for it. So I think that's why people are sensitive to bring up anything that they don't really want to talk about in the church. They just leave it out there. I come in here, I get my happies, I drink some juice, I'm good, and I'm out. But no, we need to talk about it here.
And also because, like, it's not just a church thing. Like, this is a people thing. So you should talk about things that affect people everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are. I mean, and then on top of that, when you have people of color that are inside church and people that are not the same come in and shoot the church up, are there also conversations that need to be had around that? So I can't really. It is a touchy subject. I get really passionate about that, particularly as it pertains to the church, just because it's a people thing. So it's not like a holy thing or not. It's about people.
I personally think it's dangerous because I believe that it reinforces white supremacy as far as just having that kind of outlook. I mean, it just kind of basically says that the status quo is okay. It doesn't challenge what's going on, the issues that we face in our society, and I just do not think that I think it's dangerous.
I think as someone who I have no religion, I don't go to church. I think for me, I do martial arts. That's my church, is that hour that I go. And I've been teaching yoga for the past 10 years, and I have students who that's their hour, that's their time. And something that I teach and also practice in martial arts is that for that hour, I am going to be working as hard as I can for that fight. And I put that fight in quotes. And it can be a physically hard hour and an emotionally and mentally tough hour. But if I can't get through that hour fight, there's no way that I'm going to get through the fight the other 23 hours outside the room. When people come to do yoga, yoga is not to be peaceful and it's about to find peace and finding grace, which is a church or martial arts or whatever other thing that you do for that hour of the week or hour of the day. And so flipping it around, that this is not supposed to be the place where everything is fun, easy, and comfortable, and out there we'll figure out, no, if you can really go through the weeds in here, and if you could really challenge yourself in here, I'll flip that around. If you can't do it in here, there's no way you're going to be able to do it out there. So if you could do it with a community of people you love and care about and do it in the way that you're working, then you could walk outside and go, all right, I'm prepared for this. I'm ready for this. And that's something that I think it's just an idea of letting your church, if it's an actual church or something else, let that be the time. That's your science lab. That's where you get to really find the place of things that don't work. So when you go encounter things that don't work again, it's not your first time.
Great. All right, so this is a little long, so I'm going to paraphrase whoever wrote this one. This person grew up in the Midwest and loves Motown music, and they recently went to the 60th anniversary of Motown. But there was no white person a part of that celebration. So what do you think of that? And I think that kind of goes back to the cultural appropriation, cultural appreciation. Like, would it have been okay for a white person to have been involved in that celebration of Motown music?
I mean, Tina Marie was a white artist.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like as long as you maintain the integrity of the music and maintain the integrity of the art itself, I don't think there's any
a
reason
right
to be
way to
offense.
do it.
If anything, I was more offended by Jennifer Lopez's Motown tribute at the Grammys because that was trash. You know what I'm saying? But, yeah, as long as you maintain the integrity of the music itself, I don't take any offense to it whatsoever.
I mean, it's the Motown is from the culture it's from. Period. It's the pyramids are in Egypt, right? So when you say when you think of the pyramids, that's Egyptian, or with the proper name of which I won't. I'm not there yet, but I think there so it's created in and amongst or it's represented by that place. Now, those pyramids weren't built under the greatest of circumstances or great circumstances at all. I mean, slavery has done things that we celebrate, which is a whole other conversation. But there's also something to be said about understanding that. I grew up in the East Coast where Motown was celebrated, and I think of Motown, I don't think of color, I think of Motown. I think that because it comes with black culture. It comes with that part of the world in Detroit. It comes from there. So that's part of Motown. That's in Motown. So I think that needing to see something else to identify, you're there for Motown. And so why would there be anything else than what Motown is?
I had this question. Did I turn my thing off? Yeah, I don't even need it. I don't think, but I'm super loud. But I had this question with Dia de los Muertos, and it was like, am I allowed to go? Am I allowed? And it was like, yes, it's a celebration. It's a celebration. If you're there to honor, and if you're being invited and you're celebrating, yes. If you're using it as a costume on Halloween or at a club or something, then no. But yeah, for that, it would be a celebration. I think that's the difference between cultural appreciation is that, yeah, you're celebrating it. You're not, making fun of it in some way or try to take it as your own and doing it somewhere else.
To go back to the idea, oh, yeah.
Which doesn't involve J-Lo, does it?
No,
No, I think-
not at all. You're fine.
I think the idea of like celebrating something that you can enjoy and watch and be at is different than trying to take a part of it. And
sure.
I spend a lot of time doing work in the Middle East, and I'm not Muslim, but there, when morning prayer happens, it's peaceful. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what they're saying, but I enjoy the beauty of people are stopping right now to reflect, and so I enjoy being a part of that. I enjoy being here in a church that I'm not a part of, but I feel like I'm a part of because it's welcoming. And so I come in as a beginner, and I say, wow, I could just be a sponge. Yeah. Yeah.
But it was just, it's my youth, it's what I grew up with. It was neat.
I think I kind of understand this where, like, I know a lot of people say there's a BET, but there's no WET. Like, what if someone made an all-white television station? You know?
CBS or
Yeah, right, right.
I mean, we can run down the
Oh, you're
list.
starting from 2.
I
We're
get
going
that.
up, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I say. Like, you guys have all the stations. Like, you always already have that, all right? So I think when people hear, like, oh, it's a black show or it's all this show, I'm like, well, we're not excluding white folks from it. Like, if a white artist came in that could sing appropriate, I don't need Cyndi Lauper up there trying to do some, some rendition of old Aretha Franklin song. But, like, yeah, if they can sing, I've never had a problem with a white person singing a black person's song. But if we don't have to, I mean, if we can get it done with just us, it's not a problem. I just think, again, when we look at racism, it's hard for us to find another question. If reverse racism doesn't exist, like, we can't be like, oh, we just doing this for us, you don't get to be in it. Like, white folks could force their way in. I'm pretty sure a white person owned the building they were in, right? Someone, I'm sure, what's that? No, I'm saying the property, the channel. What channel was it on? Do you know what's coming on? Oh, that's definitely white. So, okay, that's what I'm saying. So we can't get away from that, so. I'm sure a lot of them were white, too. Exactly.
Okay, how much of racism is fear of the dominant culture in control, losing control, and how can we help overcome that fear?
A lot. I mean, I think that people are afraid of the status quo shifting. I mean, if you're acclimated to something being a certain way for hundreds of years, the mere thought of something even being a little bit different is going to be frightening. So, I mean, I definitely think that fear plays a lot into that mindset and why people are so adamant about maintaining how things are.
I think it's funny that they don't want to be in the minority. It's like, why is that bad? Is it like maybe minorities are treated a certain way in this country, and that's why you don't want to be in the minority? Yeah. And I go back, if I went into television and film and people are like, oh, we're seeing, more people of color, you could have a person of color in every film that comes out this year and it still wouldn't undo the history so we shouldn't even make a dent in the history of cinema where we haven't seen ourselves. So I think that, again, goes back to that white privilege of white people having those conversations with their friends, with studio executives, with all that, because it's going to be really hard for us to say, no, you don't understand, like, just seeing a little bit more of us to them scares them. And that, to me, goes to what you're saying, that they're used to the status quo, they're used to being in the majority, and the idea of them being anything less terrifies them. And so I don't know if that's necessarily anything that we can remove from them. I think it might be a conversation that other white people need to have.
So there's a book called The ISIS Papers, written by Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. It is a rough read if you're not black, because it talks exactly about this, that the fear of being dominant by the more dominant DNA structure is intrinsically built into the white race. Like, everything about a black man is the dominant gene, whether it's our skin, our eye color, our hair, our size, or structure. So it's almost impossible for you not to be fearful. I know a lot of white guys and they're like, I'm good, I'm straight. So I know you guys are a cool, manly man around here. But it's just the fact that the dominant traits are collected inside the black male's DNA. So there's a lot in this book that talks about, scientifically, they're just built to be afraid. So a lot of the systems and structures and symbolisms just denote that fear. So I don't know how to get away from that, because if it's just intrinsic in your DNA, that's just how is developed. And also when we look at like interracial relationships, a lot of people say, well, if a white man or a white lady or whatever have sex with a black person, the baby's always black. Well, that's because the DNA just comes out that way. So it's like that's, in this book is talking about that's how intrinsically you're designed if you're white to be afraid. I'm just gonna tell you straight up, I'm not trying to annihilate you people. We're good. You know, we can hang out, get some coffee afterwards. Black brew coffee is the best. I'm just gonna talk about it again.
More black-owned businesses.
Right, black-owned business. But yeah, that is a valid fear. So I don't know, as a black male, I would just, you know, try to be as friendly as I can and be as not dominant looking. I don't know how that makes any sense. But yeah, it's yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think another way that we could start to heal that is when white people actually ask themselves that question. So they ask amongst themselves, why do we feel this way? Why do we feel like we are this and it's weird to be a minority? Why do we feel that? And I think once that conversation, and by the way, I'm gonna shout out my white brother that's here today, Daniel.
Wait, are we pointing out our white friends that came?
I don't have any white friends, so.
You can have some of mine.
But I said that because when I told him that I was doing this, he literally, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, Daniel. He literally was just saying, I would like to know how to, he didn't use the word be an ally, but what can I do? How can I understand this so that, you know, when the opportunity comes up, that we can have these conversations? And I think that's the route to go, at least the starting point, when it comes down to the fear and the losing control and things like that. So that's my spill.
Go for it.
I just wanted to add one more thing on there for people that are listening. I think also we're not saying, because like the conversation that I see, if you haven't noticed, live online. I live online. I'm way on social media way too much. And anytime I speak up, let's say about men, I'll have people be like, not all men or not all white people. What we're saying is, but enough white people, but enough men.
In power.
You know, but just in general, like enough people are doing it. So like we obviously have friends, allies, people that are rooting for us, people that are on the front lines and helping, and everyone that came here today to listen to this conversation, because you didn't have to be here. And we're not saying you specifically, but we're saying enough people are doing this, are still doing this, that is still affecting us in such a manner that we need your help.
I also think as the white man up here on the panel, that it's not just for your, I mean, it would help my work and my life and what I'm doing as a human being to know that there's that this is five equal, six equal people sitting and having a conversation. And I think that's something that there should be an identification amongst the white culture that there is a benefit to everybody for everyone to be equal. This is not just let me help you because, well, I have a little bit of, no, this is a human issue that we can't tackle if we focus on I went from grades K through 12 and read this book and this is the story, and well, what if you go outside your community and out of your state and out of your country and you go find, black issues all over the world, and white issues all over the world, and Hispanic, and notice that they're not all equal. They are disproportionately in different sections on different parts of the world. And so suddenly you are lost from who you are and who you're looking at, and you're just looking at people's stories, which I think when we started talking about how entertainment is, storytelling is the oldest art form in the world, and it's one of the few things that's done as an emotional tool and as a cerebral tool. Storytelling does that, and it moves that. And I think there's something, just a brief story about what I've been working on a project that's a true story of a Syrian refugee, and it's all in Arabic, and it's with all Arabic talent, and it's just a story that impacts people because we're all human. And one of the things I get into in pitch meetings when they say, well, are you Arabic? Do you have an Arabic background? I say, no. They go, well, was your grandfather? And I say, well, no. And they say, well, are you Muslim? And I say, well, no. And they realize I have no connection to this story other than that it's a good story, and that in and of itself, I guess you can call that an ally. They go, oh, so then we don't need any type of connection to the story to like it? Oh, okay, cool, I get it now. And so there's this odd process of just doing something because it's a good story, because it's good content, because it's just for others and it's just for you. And if there's race involved, then yeah, hopefully we can figure that out. But if you just do what's right because it's right, then you're not telling a story because it has a cast of 8 black actors who are all the A-list black actors in this film, but what about the after Black Panther? Is it going to be Chadwick Boseman in every single one of them, or can we begin to broaden out that Mahershala Ali is, you go into so many pitch meetings and there is the black role and it's an Oscar role and everyone goes Mahershala or Idris Elba. It's not about them because they've become this iconoclast of, well, they're going to be considered the bankable black actors. Well, there's Crazy Rich Asians should open the door for Asian roles, not just the most popular ones under tropes in their characters in the film. So I think it goes beyond this sense of this is a black film, a white film, a Latina film. It's a story, and then there needs to be no ally because we're all saying that we're humans telling a human story of which happens to deal with all these things that are quite imbalanced. And hopefully if we tell the story, then we shift the scale 0.0000001%. And then when the next person does it, it's 0.00015%. And then little by little, hopefully we can actually get somewhere less than it just being, well, here's the black thing, it did well, and the Hispanic thing did well, and the white people are worried about it. How that story has to change by us changing it.
Well said. I want to end on this because there was a comment on one of the cards that I want to bring up because I think that this concept is very interesting, that some of the things that we've voiced up here almost sounded as if it was reverse racism. And I want to talk about that concept because I think it's a myth. There's just racism. And I also want to make sure that people understand that being pro your race and pro your culture does not mean anti-white. It means you are pro your race and pro your culture. You are just proud of who you are and where you come from. So let's just talk a little bit about reverse racism a little bit.
So I kind of want to start with the word racism itself.
Yes.
Because going back to that book by Dr. Welsing, it talks about the word racism is actually white supremacy. Because first of all, the word, break it down etymology-wise, an ist, I-S-T, is someone who's an expert in the prefix. You guys with me? So if you're a therapist, you're an expert in therapy. If you're an artist, you're an expert in art. A pianist, expert in piano, right? So how is a racist an expert in race? Doesn't make any sense, right? Because someone years ago changed that word from white supremacy, or the theme, the idea, into racism. Yeah, we all can be racist. No, we all cannot be. So the word racism already hides something. There's already something vague hidden behind that word. So that's why reverse racism doesn't work, because the word racism already is something that we're not understanding. Or if I was a racist, I'd be really good at running or NASCAR. That's a real racist, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what it means. Okay, so if we look at the word racist, it already means something that we're not looking at. We're not looking past the curtain and understanding what it really is saying is there is a dominant ethnic group that is oppressing another. So you can't have reverse racism if that's already the intrinsic meaning of the word.
Yeah. I just think it's just such a stupid concept as far as reverse racism, just because in order to reverse racism, I mean, in order for you to experience reverse racism, that would mean that we're talking about like disproportionate jail sentences. We're talking about how banks are giving us higher rates. We're talking about all these different things that are a byproduct of racism, and these are literally impossible for the dominant culture to experience. So it's like, how can reverse racism even exist if we're not even in a position in which we can even do these things? Like, it's just like, what are you talking about when you talk about reverse racism? Can we exhibit discriminatory behavior? Sure, but that's also a byproduct of how we're treated. So it's like, when you talk about reverse racism, it's like, what are you really talking about? And you're talking about racism.
I just think reverse racism is a byproduct of white guilt. Somebody saying, oh, I want to feel guilty for this thing that I should feel bad about, so I'm going to say that there's a term because, like you said, it's not all white people, it's not all men. So for me, I am being oppressed because of this. It's just a whole lot of word salad. I don't think reverse racism. I think it's a white term of like, well, not me, and so.
It can't happen in a country that was built for white people. Like, it just doesn't, that, like, everything, I didn't say anything because you guys already said it perfectly, but it's impossible to experience that in a country that was built for you. So the things that we are doing, like you said, being pro our culture, those are things that we have to do. And like you were saying as well, like, oh, maybe we're discriminatory, like, oh, so our cast, we want it to be a primarily black cast. It was like, we have to do that in order to even have a tiny bit of representation. It goes back to what I was saying, that we could make every film that comes comes out this year, a person of color, still would not undo the years that it wouldn't put a dent in cinema. And so it's things that we have had to do, but the country is still set up and will continue to be set up for white people in a way that you don't deal with prison sentences, police brutality, bank jobs, denying you for your last name or your hair for, how you wear your hair culturally. And so, it doesn't exist.
Well, before we wrap up, Dakota, where can everyone find you online?
Dakota Lupo. I'm the only one in the world, so just Google Dakota Lupo and I will show up a whole bunch of times. Yeah.
Dani.
I'm Ms. Dani Fernandez. I'm not the only Dani Fernandez. There's so many. There's a magician. There's a boy band singer. There's so many of us.
So I show all the Dani Fernandez like at a round table.
I added a bunch of them on Facebook when I was younger, and they blocked me because I kept tagging them in photos that weren't them. Gosh, so I have like other Dani Fernandez side that don't like me. And then I wrote in a book called The Good Immigrant USA that comes out next week that you can pick up. I wrote an essay about my experience, my family's experience here. It's a very popular book that came out in the UK with UK-based actors and writers of color. Riz Ahmed very famously wrote an essay in it, I think called Airports and Audition Rooms, talking about his experience in both those places. And I was asked to write in the US edition, so that drops next week.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter sometimes at death2adverbs, or you can just read me on the route every week.
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, The Soul Creator.
You can find me on everything at 4 Karmel, but more importantly, Black Brew is also everywhere, BLCK,
Please Shy His Coffee. And on March 11th, Karmel and I will be turning this series into a podcast that you'll be able to listen to every week. And we'd love to have you guys on the podcast as well. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions for any of the panelists, feel free to talk to them afterwards.